Hi, I'm Suze Shaner with Community Forum, and I'm your host today. And my guest is Kendra Petty, who is the executive vice president of a transportation and real estate company, and also the author of her recently published memoir, I Can't Believe I'm Not Dead. And the subtext is Escaping Abuse, a Cult, Attempted Murder, and Other Insanities, a story that cannot be true, but is. Welcome, Kendra.
Hi, Suze. Good afternoon. So great to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you for coming on. And I want to give some folks fair warning that this is a story about trauma. So if anybody has a history of trauma, just fair warning, you could potentially be triggered because we are going to get into it a little bit. So what I'm going to ask you to do, it's kind of like you've lived this very successful professional life, and in your personal life have had a lot of trauma, which you write about in the book. So I'm going to ask you if you could just give us an overview on your professional background, at the same time being, I'll call it, a recovered victim of trauma.
Sure. Well, as Suze has said, Kendra Petty, I'm an executive vice president for a transportation and parking company that's inclusive of real estate. I've been in the industry for almost 3 decades. I've worked at an executive level for 23 years. I've run several small companies, as well as several markets, or a number of markets and territories for other companies. In terms of being a recovered victim of trauma, I think my recovery will be an ongoing process for a lifetime. I have survived a tremendous amount of trauma and tragedy and worked through a lot of PTSD, not just from my childhood, but on through my adulthood. Just this continuous cycle of trauma. So I'm very happy to share in my book a number of ways that I really healed myself and moved past just being a survivor and learning how to thrive in my life.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely incredible. I mean, I told you, Kendra and I've had a number of conversations, and I told you the first 30 pages, I was like, I can't even believe this. I mean, I'm a trained clinician. I have my own history with trauma. And I'm trauma informed, and reading the first 30 pages was so disturbing to me. I was like, yes, it's hard to believe it's true. And I was like, it was hard to even get past it. Of course I did. I read the whole book, but it's just an incredible story. What made you decide to write the book? And at this point in your life, and what was really your objective in writing the book? Because sometimes people just write a book as a healing process, like, so what was really your objective in writing it in the first place?
About 5 years ago, I really hit a wall with my life. And as you mentioned, I've had a really incredible adult life, very successful. I've just created a fantastic life for myself. But as you said, behind the scenes, there was all this chaos going on all the time. And I just, 5 years ago, I hit a wall and I said, enough. Like, I have got to get to the bottom of why I continue to live through this cycle of trauma and tragedy, so that hopefully I can change it and change the trajectory and start living a life of peace. So I really started reading and digging in and trying to learn how I could heal my heart, my mind, my body, my soul. And in that process, I decided I needed to start writing everything down. And I did so by hiring a ghostwriter and working for a very long time to get it all down. But it was really a catalyst for me for healing.
Yeah. Oh, I can only imagine. And so you hired a ghostwriter, meaning what was the process like for you? Like, did you do some of the writing, or she interviewed you and she would write and give it feedback? I'm just curious about that process, and then we'll get into some of the content.
Sure.
Of the book. Yeah.
Well, the process was very painful because I did have to talk a lot about everything that I went through. And these are things that almost no one knew. I didn't talk about my childhood and the things I've been through, and even my adulthood. I really just sort of shut down for a big part of my adulthood and didn't talk a lot about the things I'd been through. So hiring Jessica. And when I first hired her, she's a published author. She's worked for two of the big publishing houses, Random House and Simon and Schuster. She's published a number of ghostwritten a number of books that have been published. So she really understands the process. And so she would interview me and record it, and then have it transcribed, and then she would turn it into written material that she would then send back to me. And it took 3.5 years of me talking, her doing some writing, me doing a lot of writing and rewriting and editing. Some of the stories I could not talk about, so I just wrote myself. Some of the more poignant ones that were in the first 30 pages of the book, I just wrote those myself. So it was really a painful process, but very cathartic. And it was painful for Jessica too. She told me at the end, she said, "This is the most difficult, the hardest book I've ever had to write or help write, the most emotional book I've ever had to write." And I actually think I ruined her, because she doesn't ghostwrite anymore. She's moved on to doing other things, but it was a process.
Well, Kendra, I can only imagine. It was really, I'm very empathic, and I was like, I was crying at some points in your book, because I don't want to give too much away, but even just even if we just focused on witnessing your brother's death, there's so much we could talk about, but I do want to read an excerpt from it where you talk about page 73, where you talk about beginning anew. People who have not lived in abusive households often ask, "Why did you stay?" The answer is simple. I stayed because it did not occur to me to leave. I was not stupid, uninformed, or weak. I did not secretly get something out of that incredibly, horrifically messed up situation. I was systematically broken down until I lost any sense of self or autonomy. I became someone who could not imagine any other way of living. So I want to ask you, what was the moment in your life when you said enough, and how could you focus on your work and be so successful while being emotionally and physically traumatized? You were beaten viciously, ongoingly.
Well, to answer your first question, in terms of sort of what was the catalyst and what was my breaking point of moving on and leaving behind both of those very abusive situations. Abuse comes with as you know, as a therapist, abuse comes with a tremendous amount of manipulation, brainwashing, gaslighting, and growing up in that environment as a very moldable child, I really didn't know that everybody else wasn't living the way I was. And it took me until I was in the middle of my senior year at 18 and just really being violently beat by my mother for years and emotionally and verbally abused. At 18, in the middle of my senior year, I was undergoing yet another brutal beating. And I said, enough. I'm 18 years old. I've dealt with this my whole life. And I jumped up and I ran out of her room, and I kept running, and I never looked back. And I moved to New York City and put all of that behind me. In my marriage, I was married to an addict. I did not know she was an addict, and she was a very abusive addict, and broke my bones on a number of occasions, sent me to the hospital. I had to have her arrested. It was really a crazy time. And at 6 years of the relationship, and I knew for many years that I needed to get out. And again, it's that whole manipulation and really finding that strength to leave. But in the 6th year, I knew I needed to leave or she would kill me. And so I moved her out and away. But in terms of keeping up with my work, for me, I always wanted a career. Never was really focused on getting married and raising a family or having kids. I wanted a career. I wanted to be successful. I wanted to make money and not have to depend on other people. So it was always a focus for me, no matter what was going on in my life. And really, I think it was a bit of an escape, but I'm also very good at compartmentalizing things, trauma and tragedy. And I think this was a coping mechanism that I learned very early on, putting that physical pain or mental pain in a box, setting it aside and saying, I'll be back to deal with you later, because right now I've got to focus on this. And that's really how I've kind of dealt with all the trauma through my life.
Well, I mean, clearly you're incredibly strong, and it has its upsides and strengths to being able to compartmentalize so that you can focus and take care of business. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to focus. You'd be decimated.
Right.
What what is the potential downside of compartmentalizing, and what are some strategies you have in healing your trauma? Because in the book you say, unfortunately, the mental health system has failed you. You had some bad experiences with therapists, although you've done a lot of reading and you've had some other healing, events, but you know, and like you said, it's ongoingly things that need to heal, not just emotionally, but some of the trauma literally lives in your nervous system with those beatings.
Right. Absolutely. It certainly does. I work really closely with a couple of homeopathic doctors to really heal my body, and at the same time my mind. But I did have some really bizarre experiences with therapists and I just realized for me that wasn't my path to healing. And I know therapy works for so many people. And anytime I have someone in my life that's going through anything, I recommend therapy for them. But I think from the way I was raised and the way I learned to cope with things, there weren't people to talk to growing up or even in my adult life. And so I really internalized it, and I worked through it in my mind and in my own heart and soul. And in the last 5 years, I've really focused on a lot of energy work, and a lot of meditating and healing in that sort of at that level, rather than talking about it. But the book, I spent 3.5 years talking about that book, and now talking about it further in situations like this, the healing continues.
Yeah. Well, I know for myself, I mean, I'm a practitioner of energy work, and I've received a lot of energy work. So I intimately know the benefits of that, especially when you have so many somatic things that also need to be healed, not just, emotional trauma. I want to read another excerpt from the book, because you also had some trauma in your workplace situations.
I do.
So on 248, one of your bosses, we'll call him Dick, right, craved power and money. When hurting someone is not necessarily the goal, but you do not mind hurting someone to get there, you're a sociopath. When you intentionally hurt someone to get what you want and you enjoy hurting them, you're a psychopath. That is what Dick was. That is an important distinction that should not be forgotten as the rest of my story unfolds. So in your mind, because being a psychopath or a sociopath, either one is not a great story. So in your mind, why was it important to make this particular distinction in regards to your story?
So my mother had sociopathic tendencies, along with other mental illnesses, but she had sociopathic tendencies. Dick, who is a person in my book who used to be the CEO of a company that I worked for, is a psychopath. And the difference between the two, and I think it's important to know the difference, because a psychopath, and you're a therapist, so you know this even better than I, but a psychopath has much more violent tendencies. They share a lot of some of the same characteristics, but a psychopath can become very violent, has the capability of killing people. And that's Dick. Obviously, Dick has the capability of killing people. Well, it's only obvious if you read the book, but that's what makes Dick a psychopath. That and many other characteristics that he has. Yeah.
Well, you have had contact with your mother in recent years, and I know she's in hospice, right? How have, just given everything that you experienced, I mean, how have you resolved and, to whatever extent, work through that relationship? And any advice that you might give someone who's might be in a similar situation?
That's a tough one. For my mother and I, there's really no resolution. I did try to resolve some things before I left. When I moved to New York City after high school, I tried to understand why she was the way she was and why it was always directed at me throughout my whole life. And honestly, I felt like it was because I felt responsible for my brother's death, and I felt like she blamed me as well. So I accepted that abuse, because that abuse was not dealt to the other kids, the other children in the family, the way it was to me. And so I had approached her before I left for New York, and asked her about it and said, I don't understand, why all the beatings, you choked me so many times so I blacked out. Like why me?
Yeah.
And she looked at me dead in the eyes and said, I honestly don't remember any of that. And I thought, okay, it was only like 7 months ago. How you could forget that. So at that point, I realized, my mother is mentally ill, and there is no rectifying. There's no resolving with someone who's that ill and that sick. And I left for New York, and I never looked back. And I left behind all of that. In my 20s, I was very angry. It took me time to heal through and work through that, but I resolved it on my own.
Well, that takes incredible strength of spirit and tenacity of will. I mean, really, because we can intellectually understand it, but in some sense, on a primal level, it feels like there's something unnatural about cutting off your family. And yet you needed to do that in order to survive. In the book on page 341, you say, my traumas and tragedies do not define me. I define myself, and I use my experiences to build, grow, learn, and become stronger. So given, and we know healing is ongoingly in an iterative process with many layers and nuances and complexities. But given where you're at now and the lens you have now, looking back or being present and perhaps looking forward, what did you learn, and how do you become stronger each and every day?
There's so many things that I've done in the process to move towards healing. It would take many more books to include it all, but I would say the first and foremost thing, and I've really tried to practice this my whole life, is to not get stuck in self-pity, to not get stuck in a woe is me, to not get stuck in a blaming mode, because that really just puts you in a negative space, in negative energy, and it pulls you down. My experiences do not define me. I define me. And I think through that, I've been able to pull myself out and move towards working on energy healing and meditating and so many other things that I've done to heal my heart and my mind.
Kendra, it's really extraordinary. And I want our viewers to know that you and I had several conversations before today, really talking through what was okay for me to ask, where were we going to go with this. So I just want people to know that. So any questions I'm asking, I'm not surprising you with any questions.
Right.
And so one of the questions, because, when your brother died, you were a little child. I think you were 8, right?
Yes.
So of course, there's no way a child is responsible for their sibling's death. So given the healing process of the book, how do you make sense of your brother's death now that you have so much lived life and understanding behind you? And after this experience of writing the book, in other words, did anything shift for you in this regard in the process?
I honestly, I can't make sense of my brother's death, no matter how I look at it, no matter how I drill down into it. I can't rectify it whatsoever. It's the one thing that I will spend the rest of my life trying to understand and trying to forgive myself for.
Oh, is there any acceptance or just being with what is?
I do know that my brother is in a better place, or he's in a good place, if you will. And I do feel his presence with me sometimes, and that is very comforting to know that he's with me, and I do feel like he's one of my protectors.
Well, how have you been able to recapture a sense of love and connection in your life?
I've always been a lover, and I've always desired love in my life. So by nature, I'm a lover, but by nature, I'm also a fighter, because I had to be to survive so many things. But so I don't think I ever really lost my desire to love. I think more so it took a lot of work for me to to let go of the fear that I lived in for so long after my employer tried to murder me, and then all the aftermath from that. After all that happened, I lived in solitude and fear for years. I shut people out. I was scared all the time. I lived in fear. So for me, it was really about learning to let my guard down and let people back in my life and in my heart.
Well, Kendra, it sounds so easy to do. And given everything you've been through, how are you able to do that? And what advice, if any, would you recommend to somebody who's in a terrifying, abusive situation?
I would first say, I mean, I do know how hard it is to get out of these abusive situations. It's very difficult. You get pulled in. There's a lot of mental manipulation, but don't get stuck. Don't stay in a toxic situation. You've got to move forward. You've got to get out. That's the only way you can even begin to think about healing from all that trauma, is not getting stuck. So remove yourself from that toxic situation. And I know it takes time. So while you're working on that plan to remove yourself from that situation, find things that bring you joy. Find things that make you happy to help start healing your heart. For me, it was laughter, and laughter has always been such an important part of my life. My father's very funny. My brother's very funny. I come from a funny family, and so laughter was always an important part of my father's side of the family, and humor. And so I took that into my adulthood, and anytime I start to get stressed or I start to feel any angst, I just know I need to do something or read something or watch something or listen to something that will make me laugh. So find things that bring you joy, but don't get stuck in pity or self-blame or in a toxic situation.
Well, that's very empowering. I mean, laughing just frees things up, and laughing and crying is similar energy, but it's always more fun to laugh than it is to cry.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Right. So I know that it was incredibly scary for you to even think about publishing this book. And, now that the book's out, how are you with the fear of the story being told and some folks maybe not happy that you've told the story?
Right. Honestly, that was the biggest trepidation I had in publishing the book. I mean, first, just it makes me so vulnerable. The things that I've shared, many of them I've never talked about or told many people at all. So putting that out there for everybody to read was very difficult. But probably bigger than that was my biggest trepidation was publishing this book, knowing that the people that tried to murder me, some of them are still alive. It's been almost a decade and a half. Some of them are still alive. Some of them, a couple of them are still in the industry. So that was very nerve-wracking. But I just decided through talking about it for 3.5 years, and even leading up to that, with people telling me constantly, you need to write a book, you need to write a book, just some of the crazy things that have happened to me in my life. I felt like there had to be a reason that I was still alive. I have escaped death so many times, far more than that's in that book. So I knew there had to be a reason. I thought maybe the reason is I need to share my story. And so that really kind of catapulted me into publishing. But I've also taken a lot of steps to protect myself from any potential pushback or from the people that tried to kill me.
Well, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Kendra. No, you have disguised the identities. So this is really about not getting after anybody, but telling your story and how you navigated through it. Right?
Exactly. And by not revealing them, I feel like I've hopefully taken out some insurance policies and they realize that, that's not information I'm going to share, and we can all just move forward in our lives.
Well, what do you want readers to take away from your story after reading your story? Like what do you want to leave them with? What do you hope that they distill out of all this tragedy and trauma?
Sure. I think there's probably five big points that I like to share with people. One, as I've said before, don't get stuck in self-pity or blame. Don't get stuck in a toxic situation. Move forward. Change is important when you're in a bad situation. Surround yourself with positive energy, positive people. remove any negative energy as best you can. There are some situations where maybe you can't remove the negative energy, and negative people, but as best you can, surround yourself with good and positive. Really important, practice gratitude daily. This is why I have my tattoo that says lucky. I'm lucky to be alive. And this is my daily reminder about how lucky I am to be alive and live such a wonderful life that I have. Fourth, and this is resounding in anybody that's talks about healing, writes about healing, is practice forgiveness. Focus on forgiveness. And that's really hard, but it's something that I work on every day. And then lastly, let love in. Let your guard down and let love in.
Wow. Well, those are inspirational words. And as you said, I mean, forgiveness, everyone talks about it. It's easy to talk about it. It's hard to really do at a deep level. And sometimes it's iterative. So we've got 2 more minutes. So it went by quickly. If someone was interested in contacting you because they had a question or just wanted to contact you confidentially about anything, how might they reach you?
So I'm on Instagram and Facebook. I also have a website, KendraPettyOfficial.com. That's Kendra, Kendra, Petty, Petty, official.com. You can reach me and email me through there or through my Instagram and Facebook. I've definitely had a number of people reach out to me through the process since publishing the book, and that's been really wonderful to hear all the positive feedback about the book. So please feel free to reach out to me.
Well, I can only imagine now that it's out there and people are reading it in terms of the conversation, and it's taking on a life of its own.
It is. And it's been such wonderful feedback. I've gotten such incredible support. People reaching out to me saying, thank you for sharing your story. I know that took a lot to do, and it's very brave of you. I align with some of the things that you went through, and it's so refreshing to know that I didn't go through it on my own, that other people have been through it. I've also had people who have said, thank you for all the things you've shared in your healing process. I'm now putting those into play, and they're really helping me. And thirdly, I've had people say, your book was the kick in the pants that I needed. My life was not so bad. I need to get up and really get moving and appreciate my life and be grateful for my life. So it's been just incredible feedback.
Well, it does put things in perspective. Life's relative, right? Well, Kendra, first of all, thank you for coming on the show. Thank you for your courage and generosity in writing the book that can help so many people.
Thank you, Suze. I'm so grateful for the time. Thank you for having me. It was wonderful.
Absolutely. I'm Suze Shaner. Until next time with Community Forum. Thanks for joining us.